Alrighty, good afternoon. This is Jonathan Albin, the Game Market Guru, and this is Nikos Insider the 10. And today I thought what we might do is the 10 steps to becoming the ultimate role playing experts. I know that there are a lot of sites out there that can provide you information on being a better player and things like that, but this is kind of a unique process, I believe, that we can actually develop the way we interact in a way that better suits the role play environment. So today we're going to be looking at basically a countdown of the 10 steps necessary, and really important to the way you role play is a decision about which game system to use. And there are hundreds, and in particular, even if you go back to the root and look at just Dungeons and Dragons itself, there are plenty of storytellers and game masters that are still hosting games going all the way back to original basic Dungeons and Dragons to the what they call the white box, blue box era, on into advanced Dungeons and Dragons, second edition, third edition, 3.5. Some went to 4.0, and now the go-to is called 5e. It's actually Dungeons and Dragons without an addendum, because the version they've now created is considered to be a living game. So their thought process would be to never have to change the game again from this point on. Of course, that's really not relevant, but the reason why you want to take that into account when you're choosing to become a role player is that the type of format matters just as much as the rules basis. So perhaps your forte is the online communities such as Roll20, or maybe you're an observer and really get into the Critical Role and other of the live streams. Maybe one of your favorites happens to be Nikos D&D Online, which would be awesome since that's my channel. So that's one format. Another format, of course, is the classic tabletop itself, where you and the other players exclusively are at the game's table. Or maybe what you do is a little bit of a hybrid. We even have had some episodes where people chimed in as our subscribers are eligible to become players and such like. Ultimately, the way in which you play is only part of the equation. The next part, of course, to choosing a game system is, are you going to play in a games store where the product is readily available and you can pick up supplements instantaneously? Perhaps your preference is to play in your own living room or den or whatever. Or, as I said before, maybe your experience and your desire is to play online through play spaces like Roll20. Regardless of which system you choose, it's important to get a hold of all of the resources and learn the mechanics of whichever system that is. In the case of Dungeons and Dragons, for example, you'll want to be prepared in that game system to use polyhedral dice, from the classic six-sided that we're all familiar with to the odd-shaped 4, 8, 12, 10, 20, even 30 or 100-sided dice that are out there. Getting familiar with which dice are used by which system is really important to make sure that you are getting the best and the most out of the experience. So it's usually best to become familiar with the dice that are used and when each one is appropriate. I will be doing a video here in the next couple of weeks concerning the dice and which ones are most appropriate for which conditions. But until then, make sure you take a look at the rule system that you are going to be getting into, so that you have an idea of a familiarization, if you will, with those dice. Beyond just getting a set of dice and a tabletop to play on, you also need to find a games master. And I utilize the word games master in particular because many of the people out there that are dungeon masters have limited experience with the system, let alone with gameplay in general, and they really don't know how to handle situations that fall outside of the parameters of the rules. So getting a games master who is a veteran with a variety of games experience is kind of essential. I, of course, am touting my own experience. If you certainly want to be a part of one of my games, we have sessions available at Gameology in Upland, California, 916 Mountain Avenue in Upland, and we are there Wednesdays, Fridays, Sundays, and occasionally 2 or 3 other days of the week because I can't seem to stay away from the place. But getting a veteran, a game master who has a lot of experience will definitely make it so that your play experience, the ambiance of your game will be enhanced. You definitely want to look at, for the standpoint of being a good role player and having a great role play experience, you want to make sure that the storyteller's process is a story-based game with an edge towards what I call, and what my players have called, the rule of cool. Basically, there are times when the rules as written can be a little dry, a little unimaginative, a little lackluster. By utilizing a story-based system with a bit of an edge, you give yourself a place to push off to make the adventure more exciting, more thrilling, and so like. So finding yourself a great games master and utilizing a system that you are familiar with, your games experience will be enhanced considerably. Next, we want to talk about considering the party composition. Now, when you are putting together a games group and you are trying to find people to play with, in addition to finding out whether or not you can get along with the players, you want to see whether the characters you are building collectively can work together. Is the party going to be synced, for example, to a certain theme? If the adventure is based on a coastline with lots of seafaring adventures, but one of you decides to play, a Western cowboy, that player's character might have difficulty fitting in. It might be more of a challenge for both the game master and for you as players to enjoy that shared experience if the change is too disjunct. So try to get a feel for that. Also consider whether or not your group is trying to become, if they're trying to cover all bases, or whether they are simply looking for nuances of storytelling. I've had players in groups play very widely ranged characters, and they still work out if the players are willing to accept the story's direction and move towards that kind of a completion process. Also, you want to choose a role that is not only complementary to the players that are involved and to the story, integral to the story. You also want to make sure that it's something you find appealing. I have been in games where I was basically asked to play a character that didn't fit my motif, and while it can be fun, you can derive entertainment from anything, I suppose. A truly enjoyable experience is when you can truly become immersed in the character, which means the role that you're assigned or the position you're playing in the group is in line with what you want to do anyway. So consider your party's composition as well. Next, you want to consider within the role play type that you choose a proper archetype. And that word's been bandied a bit around. Let me give a clarification. An archetype is a framework around which you build the story character you want to play, not the other way around. I have had a dozen times or more in my last 2 years where players come to the table with their fingers clenching their nose because they don't want to play the character. It's not what they really want to do, but they feel like they have to. And you want to have the best role play experience possible. You need to make sure that your archetype is based on the mechanisms you want. Now, this does tie back to the game style that you agreed to play in the first place, because some games systems, like Dungeons and Dragons, are totally advancement based. In other words, they don't anticipate you will start the game with a character that you want in particular, but you will have a basis from which you can develop or grow into that role. This may be one of the most critical parts of putting together a character for a game, because if it is a situation where you are playing a role and what you are playing doesn't feel right or feels incomplete, then it's not just the game master who's responsible for fixing the situation, but you as a player need to start to develop towards those roles. Now, if this is not your cup of tea, if you're wanting a story-based game where your character is fully developed at the get-go and you are simply playing out a role, I would recommend you look at some other games systems out there. The Warhammer Fantasy roleplay system and I believe the L5R roleplay system are both set up so that your character can start the story at full development, that there is not a points-based derivative advancement process that you have to go through. These other roleplay systems might be difficult to find a game master for, or might take a little bit more of a challenge to get there, but your play experience and your ability to develop in story is greatly enhanced when you're playing a system that's sympathetic to your cause. Furthermore, when you build an archetype, it's important that the game master, dungeon master, the storyteller, has an awareness of not only where you are, but where your intended growth is. And I have to say, I've changed my tune a little bit on that. When I first started role play in the Dungeons and Dragons motif, you built a character and then you played the character. You didn't pick and choose and build exactly what you wanted. So I realize that we're in a different environment now, and I've come to a realization that the players and their story builds need to be taken into account as you're creating the story. And so in reverse, when you're a player, it's very important that you have a very clear understanding that the development process will not happen instantaneously, and that the story development is going to, by necessity, come first over the character conditional stimulations that will bring your character to its fruition. So, having said that, make sure that when you're picking your archetype, it's something you can live with until it develops. Now, in all game systems out there, when you go to create your character, you have to go through some form of numeric gymnastics or numbers adjustment or whatever, but the character creation process itself you'll want to embrace. And what I mean by that is, instead of building a character and looking past the numbers, why not take a look at what it is you're building and how the numbers interrelate? Because you may find that the creation process itself can be revelatory. Perhaps you'll find that that character that you started with, that you thought would be, for example, an elf, you might inside find more clearly with the numbers that you've created might actually suit a halfling better. And realize also that, especially if you are utilizing an open roleplay dice rolling mechanism, the actual process may take you places that you never expected to go or even thought you might. I can remember the first time I ever created a druid. I was bent and determined to create a wizard, and yet the numbers ended up properly aligning for a particularly useful druid character. So don't think that the numbers as they roll have to be adjusted to meet your demands, but instead consider what might have been or what might be. Now, this next step I think is absolutely essential. We're up to number 6 here, and number 6, and that is to spend time thinking as the character, not about the character, as the character. I recently had a conversation with a player who started off with the idea of building, for lack of a better term, a shapeshifter. We talked about the lack of possibilities of a direct shapeshifter in my game. That person then adopted those numbers and became a static character with a single race, and then the following week changed the race again. And I'm not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg, the player's character or their agenda. But what I'm getting at is that if you think about developing the character and you spend too much time thinking about what it might be in the future, you actually miss out on the fun of getting there, the challenge of building the story towards that agenda. So consider the lifestyle of your character. What would his income be? What would he do on a daily basis? What are his hobbies? Where does he spend his time? Is he outdoorsy or is he bookish? Is he or she gathering information for a book, or would they rather light the book on fire? There's so many ways to consider what your character's position in life is, that in order to play a good character, to understand how your character thinks, acts, and to actually be able to take on that role and live that character's existence, consider those lifestyle issues, the conditions, and even, their wealth. How much money do they have to spend? Are they always worried about the next paycheck, or are they comfortably set up? Do they have servants? Do they live in a big house, or do they live on a hovel? When you do all of these kind of mental gymnastics, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to get the best out of the role-play experience. That, therefore, ties into the next point of this spending time with the character, or spending time as the character, is the idea that you as a player have got to get out of yourself. You have to disconnect from the person that you are in order for that character's development, for that character's existence to be enjoyable to you at all. If you look at your character that's generated as a piece of paper and a, for lack of a better analogy, a tune in a video game, you're setting yourself up for kind of a disaster when it comes to the role play, because you're not going to be getting what you want. You'll be instead building something that itself won't be satisfying. So try to spend time thinking, acting, pretending, considering the actions of your character over those that you yourself would do. Associated with that, a character is something that needs to be developed. And what I mean in particular by that is you want to read a little bit about the character. Maybe you'll read the rules, backgrounds about how the character does his thing, whether he has one weapon or three, whether he is a stylist or whether he's a blunt instrument. If you can understand better the world of the character and the things that are going on around him or her, your experience as a role player will improve, because you will begin to experience the terror, the fun, the adventure, the fright, the hungers, the appetites, etc. of the character. This means you also want to do some research. Maybe you want to find out how much a longsword weighs, and whether or not a wand is a finesse weapon or whatever. You may have a lot of information you need about what mechanically goes on in the game. All of this research amplifies your play experience. Ultimately, you want to maybe even find some, and I'm going to be using that word ultimately all day today. I see that once it gets into my vocabulary, it seeps into everything. You want to watch some films. You want to watch some action video. Maybe you can find a person or two that use the fighting style that you portray in game and can see how the blade moves in their hand, or how unwieldy that pike is, or whatever. Maybe you'll be finding a video log that lets you walk through the kind of towns your character visits, whether it be little hamlets or major, Central European cities or whatever. By becoming immersed in the world that the characters occupy, you become more aligned with that character and therefore more specifically associated with the role that you're playing and the person that you are becoming in game. Now, as we're getting to the position where we're ready to start the first game session, you want to consider that starting point. If you had the opportunity with your games master, maybe you've worked up a pre-story condition, where you are, what you are doing, what sounds, sights, smells you're experiencing at the moment the game starts. This can be a simple process or it can be long and drawn out. It depends on how much you want from the experience and how much you're willing to put into it. But you want to begin the game with a certain paradigm, and that is that of the character. You want to feel like it's happening to you. It's not just something that's happening in the area where you happen to have somebody you might know. No, this is a roleplay experience is supposed to be experiential. You are supposed to be frightened when there's supposed to be fear that your characters experience. Maybe you're supposed to feel exalted and rewarded when the party gets treasures or whatever. But you have to begin the game with a paradigm that fits and makes story sense as well. If your paradigm, for example, is, I just won the lottery and I've got $1 million and I just want to sit around and be entertained, that's far different than, I'm going to play a character in this campaign and I want to feel what it's like to, bustle my way through a smelly marketplace on Southumbria or whatever. When you start the game with a proper paradigm and you let it make the story make sense to you, the decision-making process for you as a character becomes better, which leads directly to the next point, which is breathe in the role. And it sounded like I was shouting, but I didn't mean to do that. But the biggest challenge to role play is to become the role for the length of time that you're playing to the greatest extent possible. To certain people, that means bring props, bring items that make you think of the role that you're playing. I have a very good friend whose character has a pet, no, he won't agree with that term, a compatriot who happens to be a dragon. And so he has a ceramic dragon about 3 feet or a foot and a half long that he brings to the table each session, so he can sit there and touch its wings and consider how massively heavy they are and all of that. It for him adds a comfort and an ambiance to the session to have an actual model of Snowlin there. Perhaps you're a big model painter and you've got a dozen different models for your character. Feel free to swap them out during session if one of them has got a weapon in his hand and the next one he doesn't. It's perfectly fine to make the game yours in whatever fashion that you can, as long as it's done in a way that amplifies the story impact for others. You want the story to draw you in. I know there are lots of places where I talk about story drivers and such, but if the story is not compelling, if there's not something about it that makes you want to discover, you may be doing something wrong. You may be playing something wrong. You may not even really understand what you're doing, and that's okay. We just simply have to figure out what those differences and challenges are and make them happen. You want the story to draw you in, and you want to see the story through the eyes of your character. I can't tell you how much more fun it is when I see players reeling when their character is damaged in battle and are stunned at the danger in which they've gotten their characters into, compared to those who are perfunctorily rolling dice and erasing numbers of a character sheet and, well, no big deal, blah, blah, blah. Breathing in the role means living in that character. When the GM wants to explain something to you, make sure you say, I'm sorry, I'm just a guy in the crowd. Could you explain that to me from the vision point that I'm at? Maybe the storyteller's taking the game, elevating it to another place. Make sure you help him bring it back down, because the play experience is a composition. It's not a work that a storyteller does that you then enjoy. Instead, it's the very process of your interaction and engagement with what they've created. And number 10, well, I can't believe we got through this list so quickly, but you want to live the fantasy. When you build a character, when you've developed a story for that character and an idea and an icon and identity, you want to let the in-story decisions be made by that character. So feel free to step out of the role of yourself and what's best for the character from your standpoint, and look instead at the actual options that are afforded to him. What I'm getting to here, for example, is there are a lot of people who look at character builds and they do optimization. They say, well, I need to have this skill and I've got to learn this ability, and then I've got to be over in this type of environment to pick up this extra attribute, and so on. When you play the character in story, some of those options may not become available, but instead others that you may not have even considered might be. If your game master is one who draws to the rule of cool, he's going to build something that's unique. He's going to build something that brings you towards your stated goal, and maybe even towards a future you never even considered. So if you live in the fantasy, if you live in that character for the duration of the game, the experience will be more whole. You'll feel it more. It'll be what you are, not just what you're playing. Ultimately, there I said it again. Fourth time for the day. Everybody get a shot. No. When you live out the role and you live the life that the character is intending to live, you become fundamentally a passenger in the back seat, not somebody trying to side seat or back seat drive, but instead somebody who's just enjoying the ride. What I'm saying is that the ultimate role player, the person who is getting the most out of the game, is living the character's life moment by moment during the game, and taking from that life the satisfaction that existing in that framework can provide. So thank you for your time listening to the 10 ultimate steps to role play experience. I'm Jonathan Albin, the Game Market Guru. For more, check out my YouTube page. Click on the like button down below. Click on the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And click on the bell notification so every time another one of these becomes available, you'll be invited to be a part of it. This is Jonathan Albin, the Game Market Guru, counting down the 10. Have a great day.